When was the last time you saw a card that confused you? A card that didn't fit into most decks and would require some real effort to make work. A card that has a very strange effect or one that just seems bad. In recent years, we have gotten a lot less of those. Of course, this is just a broader trend I am talking about. So if there's a new recent card that you think really got those gears turning, let me know. It is no surprise that Commander has significantly changed the way cards are designed. And generally, when Wizards designs for Commander, they err on the side of yes and. Ramp harder, draw more, do more. More cards with generic power that go in broad swaths of decks. A lot of this started with Fire design, which I think was a massive mistake. This was the idea that cards need to be fun, inviting, replayable, and exciting, all of which seems like a great idea on paper, and I feel like today we've lost a lot of old design space that I wish we explored further. That's what I want to talk about here today. But first, you only have 2 days from when this video goes up to pre-order Void Monster's Dark Ritual merch. Void Monster is an apparel store started by former MTG artist Forrest ML. They have high quality playmats and comfy shirts with TCG inspired designs. Here's my Pot of Greed inspired playmat from a previous drop. What do you think, Jojo? He loves it. Each drop has a pre-order window and then they're gone. So if you want this sick Dark Ritual design, you gotta act fast. Link below if you want to check it out. Thanks to Void Monster for sponsoring the video. So why would you put any card in any deck for any reason? Usually it is to fulfill a role of some sort. The card might be removal, card draw, or a win condition, or maybe any other effect that simply puts a smile on your face. But sometimes you play cards because of how they interact with other cards in the deck. Let's take a card like Artificer's Intuition as a completely random, unbiased example. This card effectively does nothing by itself, and with other cards, it just lets you put an artifact from your hand into the graveyard, and then you search up a bauble. Overall, a pretty small effect. Artificer's Intuition is what we might call a synergy piece. It's a card where you need to have other pieces to make it actually useful. Maybe you have a trash for treasure, so putting a big artifact in the yard and putting a cheap artifact in hand can be a very powerful play. Also, Artificer's Intuition gets much better if you have many utility 1 mana or less artifacts that you want to put in your hand, which leads to having a small package of those in your deck. It sort of asks something of you and your deck. But as cards get more complicated and do more things, the need for synergy becomes reduced. Let's look at Ice-Till Explorer compared to Crucible of Worlds. Crucible does one singular thing, and you need to have something else in your deck to make it function. Ice-Till does not. It's an exploration as a baseline, so it just lets you ramp, plus it fills the yard by itself, so you can play this with zero synergy at all. Just basic lands, and sometimes you will go forest, mill a forest, play the forest from the yard. All of the synergy and power is functionally self-contained within this one card. I do want to make a little note here. I'm not saying that Crucible of Worlds should never be power crept. Neither am I saying Ice-Till Explorer won't be played with synergy, nor that it doesn't get better with synergy. I'm well aware of the fact that you should be playing some synergy with Ice-Till Explorer. I just want to point out how multifaceted this card is and how it has effectively no opportunity cost to run in your deck, compared to Crucible, which requires synergy to actually do anything at all. Here's another example, Sidisi Brood Tyrant and the new Taval the Balanced Scale. These are fairly similar cards. Same mana cost, they both mill 3 when they attack. Sidisi has the upside of triggering when it enters, but Taval ramps and flies. Let's do a little thought experiment here. Let's theory craft a deck for each of these commanders, starting with Sidisi. Well, you really want a high creature count because you can whiff pretty easily with this card. And then you want many instances of milling, rather than milling a lot in one go, since Sidisi always gives 1 zombie, no matter how many creatures actually got milled. Because of that, we want a lot of mana dork creatures, since it's ramp, but also helps us with our creature count. Perhaps you can have a Blink sub-theme, since you can flicker Sidisi, or maybe you want to attack, and then finding ways to give the commander unblockable could be a useful piece of synergy to help you with that attack trigger. And since Sidisi only mills and makes the 2/2, you're going to need other support to have it continually make 2/2s, or you're going to need other support in your deck. Since your commander does not offer card draw, ramp, or removal, those all have to be in the list. Now let's do the same thought experiment with Taval. Taval is a bit different though. With flying, the attack trigger is actually way easier to get. So you don't actually need any synergy pieces to help your commander get in combat. You can probably just attack someone who doesn't have a flying blocker. Also, Taval provides ramp in the command zone, so you might actually not need much ramp, if any, in the list. You can instead play synergy pieces on early turns, follow up with your commander, and then just start attacking and ramping from there. And since you have ramp in the command zone, it still lets you play high cost cards with little opportunity cost, because you always have access to ramp that you can consistently use. Additionally, since this just wants anything to leave the yard, focusing on a creature-heavy deck is less relevant. You can just play any good graveyard card. And Taval has a greater snowball effect. You get a land and body almost every time it attacks, and your board state just improves consistently without needing much other synergy pieces. And as you can see, this has a few effects. We now have more room in the deck because we don't need synergy pieces to go with the commander. The commander just does more by itself. There's less restrictions on the deck, which makes Taval an almost objectively more powerful card. These are the reasons why Taval is way more popular than Sidisi. It's just easier to build a Taval deck that will function by itself much more consistently. Cards these days don't really have trade-offs. Sidisi puts power on the board and cards in your bin if you have a creature-heavy deck. Taval does that, but just asks you to play lands. You don't need a high creature count, although playing lands isn't really a restriction. You were going to do that anyway. Many cards ask for something and then also do that thing. VV asks you to make its power large and play spells. But if you play spells, it makes the power large, so that hurdle is just skipped by VV itself. And then it also does damage on top of that, because why not? Terra, Herald of Hope, wants you to reanimate creatures, but it also mills you to set up for the reanimation. Redshift Rocketeer Chief gives mana to use for activated abilities, but then also has a game-winning activated ability on the card. A lot of this is on legendary creatures specifically for commander play, but some non-legendary stuff does this as well. Hedge Shredder mills 2 cards when it enters, so it potentially powers itself. Esika's Chariot, which was not able to be a commander back when it was printed, makes the tokens to crew itself, and then you can copy the tokens that it makes with its own effect. You don't need to jump through any hoops to make the card work. It's individually powerful and sort of fuels itself. And then sometimes cards just have abilities tacked on. Simulacrum Synthesizer is a plenty powerful card, but then also just scries 2 when it enters because it has to do something immediately in case it was removed, so you still got some value. Cards these days don't have drawbacks anymore. Here's an old obscure card, Elkin Lair. This card is weird. It makes each player randomly exile a card from hand, and then if they don't cast it that turn, it goes to the graveyard. This has the obvious drawback that you might randomly lose a card in your hand on your upkeep, which means this card pairs very poorly with counterspells or board wipes, things that you might want to hold in hand and cast at a specific time. But if you build your deck with this card in mind, and play lots of cards that do things from the yard, or you play a low mana curve, so most things you can cast even if you discarded an extra land here or there, then the downside to this card is mitigated. This is a card I used in an old Neheb the Worthy deck. I played the Lair with Bottomless Pit and Liliana of the Veil, and had lots of cheap reanimation spells or utility creatures that didn't mind going to the yard. And by mitigating these downsides, my deck could make use of these cards that most lists couldn't play. Many of the new fire design cards will snowball infinitely. They continuously ramp or get bigger or make more dudes. Each turn that you have one of these snowball cards in play, the more powerful it gets and your board gets. Now this used to be reserved for like very big finishers, but now it's just kind of on everything, especially legendary creatures. Look at the 2 Valgavoths. One is a massive high mana cost, super strong mythic bomb that does snowball in card advantage. And one is a lower to the ground 4 mana scaling a card draw value engine. but that cheap mid-range value threat was designed for Commander, as opposed to the other one, which is the main set card. Although, I don't know, maybe they're both designed for Commander. Regardless, this design philosophy has led to a lot of these cards. Commanders that just say, do a thing and I'll draw you a card. But is any of this a problem? I've done a lot of yapping, but this new direction for the game is just filled with cards that are easy to use. If you put Korvold in the command zone and fill your deck with random garbage, it still works, right? Korvold draws you cards when you sacrifice things, and he does sacrificing on enters or attacks. Plus, he gets bigger. Even if your deck is random draft chaff with no sacrifice synergy, Korvold still draws you cards, still gets bigger, still takes out other players. You can't mess up playing Korvold. It always puts in work. Draws a card on ETB basically. Draws a card when it attacks. Doesn't that just make it easy for new players? Their deck is always functioning, right? Their cards always do stuff, always generate value and more value. Now for very new players, I think this is actually true. This type of design is easy. You can play your Bristle Bud Farmer and you don't even need something that makes food. This card makes the food that it needs to sacrifice, and then it draws you more cards to find things that make more food. But I do think that this also robs players of deck building. If every card creates advantage and functions independently, you don't need to learn the same skills of deck building to make a deck work. You don't find a card and then have to think about how to build with it. The joy of finally finding out what to do with a card is lost. The card just works as is. No need to worry, it'll win you the game by itself. It's also a bit of a deck building trap for new players. Eshki, Teamer's Roar, is one such card. This does everything. It's card draw and a finisher, and all you need to do is put big creatures in your Teamer deck, which is barely a requirement. So then, one trap that new players fall into is when their commander does everything, they always just slam it down without thinking, and then their deck works super well with their big snowball value engine in play, and then falls apart without it. But I honestly think if their commander did less, then players would need to pay more attention to what's in the 99 and have a more consistent deck. But then we have another issue as well. If we look at Eshki or Korvold, yes, they are very easy to build around, such that anyone can do it. Even if you didn't construct your deck very well, you will still probably do something powerful, or at least draw cards. But what happens when a player who is very experienced builds one of these decks? Well, then it can feel oppressive in how strong they are. A powered-up, tuned Korvold list is very difficult to deal with for most tables, which often leads to a bad gameplay experience, because you can't mess up Korvold. So if you build a functioning Korvold deck, it's going to be really good. If every card is snowballing into more mana and value, and cards that snowball even harder, and you just scale infinitely, then every card is a potentially game-ending threat, which makes removal very difficult. So then, instead, it is actually easier to often just snowball harder and steamroll your opponents. This leads games trending towards whoever does their thing harder wins. Plus, these value-packed commander cards really do hurt other formats that feel the power creep more. It's happened a few times in the past years, although that's another video. Additionally, this type of power creep leads to less interesting cards. If every card does a large amount of things, then how do you iterate on that? You just make the next card do the same thing but more? What would the next Taval look like? We already have a flying attacker that ramps and makes dudes easily, so will the next one also put counters on itself? Where does this lead to eventually? I feel like side grades would be a lot more interesting. If Taval did all of the same stuff but didn't make zombies, it would at least be different. Even if it's still maybe better than Sidisi, Sidisi will functionally do something better. What I'm really trying to get at in this video is that in Eternal formats, there is some fun to be had when you pull out a jank old card and use new mechanics to make the old card work. Finding new synergies and ways to use a decade-old card is exciting. But if every new card is some mythic that just snowballs out of control, why would you ever use the old cards? It leads to a card diversity issue. If every card is stronger, then won't that mean more players are just going to use the same cards because those are the best ones? And if the new ones are the best ones, then that's what new players are opening and using in their decks. So it shrinks the card pool even more. Now, I do want to stress you can have the opposite problem as well. Some cards are so narrow that there's really only one thing you can do with them. A Zombie Lady of Scrolls, for example, is a powerful but narrow card. So narrow that all Azami lists kind of end up being the same, or at least very similar. There's a healthy middle point to be had here. Nerev is a good example. This does one narrow thing, and it doesn't fuel itself. There are lots of branching paths. You can lean into haste, tokens, myriad, or blinking stuff that does damage, which I think makes this a very interesting card. It doesn't do everything, so you still need to think about card draw and removal and ramp in your deck, which adds to the diversity among Nerev lists. So to close out this video, I'm going to give some card suggestions. If you watched this whole video and sort of nodded along, then you might really like the idea of finding a weird old card and trying to make it work. I know personally that's one of my favorite things to do in Commander. So I'm going to list off a ton of cards that I think are interesting or difficult to make work, and I challenge you to make a deck around them. Feel free to write in the comments your ideas. And if you have a deck list, feel free to send it my way on socials, or check out the Patreon Discord server and you can show me there. YouTube usually auto-deletes links that are in comments, so you probably can't post a deck list there. Without further ado, here are some cards to potentially build around. Wild Research, Carrionet, The Unspeakable, Kaho Minamo Historian, Braid of Fire, Hibernation's End, Bosium Strip, Resourceful Defense, Eon Engine, Manascape Refractor, Tectonic Reformation, Dovescape, Prowling Geistcatcher, Emeria the Sky Ruin, Choice of Damnations, Volcano Helion, Emergency Powers, Wave of Vitriol, Meditate, Brain in a Jar, Faces of the Past, Esoteric Duplicator, Dan Lewis, Weapons Manufacturing, and Enigmatic Incarnation, thanks to my patrons who suggested some of these cards. With Fire Design, the inviting and exciting portion of this acronym has been mishandled, because cards are inviting by just being better than old cards, and being obviously strong. Bone Horde Dracusar is a very inviting card. 5 mana for a 5/5 with good keywords. It can attack and block so well. Plus its card advantage and its ramp, and it makes dudes. Any Commander player who opens this card in a pack will see it and go, well, it's better than this card draw or ramp or token producer I have. Get excited, quote unquote, and swap it out. But then what happens later? When they print Super Bone Horde Dracusar, that's the same thing, but it's a 7/7 for 5. You will either replace the old one or some other old card. And if every card is a must include, it means they're also all disposable. If you're just waiting for the next power crept generically strong card to replace it, how meaningful was that card? And when we compare that to unique effects that require synergy to function, I think a lot of these more strange niche cards really make decks feel cohesive, rather than having each card be individually powerful. I don't think every new card ever printed is like this, but it is a broader trend towards having cards be all upside and requiring less synergy to build around. And I think that's a shame, especially if the card's a legendary creature. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my tier 3 patrons whose names you see here. If you want to be in the credits or check out the Patreon Discord or any of the other perks, link is in the description below.